Coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically, beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And welcome to Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, we can talk directly. If you choose to type your question or comment onto whatever platform you are watching this video on, it will show up here in my chat room, and we can talk directly. And I started today by appearing on the Speak Your Own Book broadcast at 8 o'clock a.m. my time, which those of you who know me knows was not the easiest thing to do. Hello to Rev Michael in the chat room. Good to see you, Michael. But we did it, and we talked about the new book, The Corellian Book of the Dead. And if you're interested in that interview, you can find it here on Pagan World TV. And we talked about some of the things in the book, some of the things behind the book, some things kind of out there in the universe. It was a very interesting discussion. On this program, I was going to speak today about the future and sustainability of the pagan community. And hello to Renee in the chat room. And in choosing that subject, I wanted to continue forward from our topic yesterday. And hello to Janet in the chat room. Hello to Tom in the chat room. It's good to see you, Tom. And I last saw Tom this morning during that early morning interview. It's good to see you again, Tom. Yesterday, we were talking about what we might be able to do if the world became less friendly toward pagans and witches. And part of that conversation had to do with the question of who we are and what we want. And that's probably where I plan to go today. Because when we look at the future and sustainability of our community, the first question that comes up in my mind is, what do we want for our future? What is it we wish to sustain? How do we see ourselves in the first place? And the most important thing I can say to you, if you are a member of this community, that you should know is that as a community, we don't have an answer to that. We don't agree on it. And of course, we'll never all agree on it. But as a movement, there are things we need to consider because, you know, these things don't take their form on their own. You get what you build. You hold what you keep. And we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we want in our community? What do we want to see in our community? I would think some of the things we hope to continue to see in our community are educational resources, expanding in all directions. I would think, based on things I've heard discussed throughout this year, that we would like to see more resources for our elders and for the members of our community who are in various sorts of need. I can say that for the major traditions, they certainly wish to remain strong and prosperous. And I'm sure the minor traditions wish to continue to grow and expand in their own right. And then there are many people who don't belong to any tradition and don't want to, and there's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. The one thing we definitely don't want to see is any sort of attempt at creating a central authority in the community. But that doesn't mean that we can't have certain items of central vision. The most important thing I think we need for the future and sustainability of our community is a commitment to stand up for our own rights and to make sure that they are not abridged if we can possibly avoid it. And we are a minority religion. We're a much larger minority religion than we once were, and show every sign of continuing to grow, but still a minority. And as any minority religion, ethnicity, or community can tell you, that's a precarious place to be. And we need to be conscious of that. And in the conversation we were having yesterday, about the possibility of the wider world becoming less friendly towards us, there were a lot of people who said, well, I've never had a problem. That doesn't mean, though, that you can't ever. Um, just because you haven't doesn't mean it's not something that you should think about. It doesn't mean it's not something you should be prepared for, because, being prepared for something is often the best way to avoid having to deal with it. Not being ready for it just leaves you exposed. Yesterday, one of the things I talked about was the idea that if your response to danger is to go and hide in the woods, what you've actually done is left yourself alone in the woods. And if you're not successful in hiding, well, then you'll be found alone in the woods. Um, it's not really at all a safe place to be, particularly in the age of information. I think that we really need to do exactly the opposite. We need to be more visible than ever, and we need to be mindful of how we're perceived also. And, we have a lot of contrarians in our community who like um, to court sometimes negative viewpoints. Um, and I think we need to certainly not stop anyone from courting whatever viewpoint they want, but make sure that the people who are representing us accurately are the ones who are being heard. And I've always remember years ago when we first brought our headquarters to Hoopeston, Illinois, for Witch School, there was a large city council meeting staffed or filled with people who had come in from outside of the community to protest our being there. And we tried to explain to them what we were actually about. And they were totally unable to hear this. But several of them made a very interesting point that I was able to hear, which is that they did not believe what we were saying because they'd seen otherwise online. For example, one of our people tried to point out to them um, that yes, we practice spells, but we don't use them against people, and brought up the subject of a love spell, that if you did a love spell, you'd do it for the best possible love, not to force someone to love you. And one of the Christian protesters pointed out that they had seen lots of personally directed love spells online, and therefore we could not be telling the truth. And of course, the truth is we were telling the truth for our background. Um, but I think people often are more concerned with momentary self-indulgence than with realizing they're creating an impression that may come back to haunt them later. And there's nothing to be done about that, except, as I say, for the people who are trying to create a good impression, to make sure we're louder. Um, I've often talked about how we need to take control of our own image, because if we don't, others will. This is a good example of that. And um, we literally have been among the most in control of our image, and yet we still faced that situation um, where we were being judged by images created from outside of our particular community. I think that's always a possibility, but the more we do to say who we truly are, the happier we're going to be, and the better understood we're going to be. We also need to be, and nobody wants to hear this because I know I've been let know that many times by this community, but we need to be more politically aware, because whether we're interested in politics or not, it could very well become interested in us. And we need to make sure that our civil rights, um, which are currently guaranteed, remain guaranteed. And don't tell me that couldn't change. Um, look at look at the history of almost any minority in this country, and you can see all too clearly that even when advances are made, they can be lost. We need to be mindful of not losing the advantages that we do enjoy. And if we turn our back on it, particularly in an era when Christian dominionism, Christian nationalism, whatever you want to call it, has gained tremendous ground, then we're in for some unpleasant surprises, because they very much are there, and they're very much doing exactly what everyone was always afraid they were going to do. There is a question of what their ultimate success will be, but they will be successful if no one stands up against it. And we, of all people, should be mindful of this particular issue, which is the rights of minorities, and particularly minority religions, because that's us. And I was saying yesterday, if you back a candidate whose platform includes eliminating you, you're an idiot. It's kind of like being a Jewish Nazi in the 1920s, which, by the way, there were some. But in the end, it didn't matter if you thought the Nazis had great economic policies, if you weren't going to be part of that economy. And some of those Jewish Nazis who survived spoke later of how greatly they regretted not having truly understood the situation. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, if you're familiar with the beer hall push, which was one of the first Nazi attempts to seize power that failed and led to many of their leadership being imprisoned, Adolf Hitler avoided being caught for quite some time because he was hiding in the home of one of his Jewish supporters, and nobody expected to find him there. And supposedly he even had a romance with her daughter, or at least a flirtation with her. So the lady could be excused for having thought that he wasn't all that serious about the things he was saying about Jewish people, but she found out later, oh yes, he was. And she and her family were protected throughout the war because of what she had done. But she would say through the rest of her life how much she regretted having done it. But when you choose to back people who want to eliminate you, you can't later complain if you're eliminated. And I think that at this point in U.S. history, U.S. pagans need to be very aware of this. And if we're not, we'll have no one to blame but ourselves. And, over the years, Sir Edward and I were trying to point out the rise of Christian dominionism pretty much as long as we've been, as long as we've had a national platform. And for years, we were told, oh, that could never happen. That'll never happen here. We don't want to hear it. Can you imagine how different certain things might be if people had actually listened to that warning earlier than anyone did? And of course, when people finally started listening, they didn't remember where they heard it first, but that's fine. But in speaking to you now, remember where you heard it first. And remember what I'm saying now, because we have a history of being right. And it's entirely possible that a Christian nationalist rise to power will not happen here. And it's entirely possible that it will. And what is the difference? Well, a big part of that difference is what we, ordinary people, do, or what we don't do. When we talk about the future and sustainability of our community, one of the first and most important battlefields of future and sustainability is legal status. I'll remind you of the Pentacle Quest, which many people apparently don't remember, which surprises me tremendously. 10 years, leaders of most of the large Wiccan traditions fought for Wiccan veterans to be able to have the pentagram in the form of a pentacle on their tombstone. And for 10 years, they had to fight their way through the courts before they finally were able to get this basic right that was being given left and right to other groups during the same period of time. Selena Fox, Pete Pathfinder Davis um, led this challenge. We Corellians were involved in it for a time. Um, Eventually, we won, but it took a long time because of prejudice. And in the end, it was even admitted that it was purely a matter of prejudice. Um, this was not decades ago. It was a decade ago, 2 decades ago, maybe. Yeah, it would have been about 2 decades ago. Um, Not so far ago that people should not remember it. And one of the things that did most toward winning this was not convincing the wider society that pagans had a right, that Wiccans had a right to having their symbol on their tombstone, but that veterans had that right regardless of what their religion was, which turned out to be the ideal way to present the argument. But if you're thinking that prejudice cannot be a substantial issue, um, this was a point in time when Christian nationalism was a much smaller movement. Um, Things like, well, let's go back 40 years. We're close to 40 years to the Helms Amendment in the 80s. The Helms Amendment was intended to revoke legal recognition of any church that was connected in any way to witchcraft, with no particular definition of what witchcraft was either. Um, would have been absolutely devastating to our community in terms of legal standing. Was totally defeated at that time. Would it be if it came up today? Maybe. Um, I imagine if it came up today, it would be. Will it be tomorrow? Do you think there's nobody who'd bring it up? Have you looked at the new Speaker of the House? Have you looked at things he's said? Have you looked at things he's done? We need to be aware of this. And to pretend that it doesn't influence us, that we're just going to go hide in the closet if something bad happens, is incredibly foolish. Because again, if you go hide in the woods, it doesn't mean they're not going to find you in the woods. It just means you'll be alone when they do. Um, so those are my primary political thoughts on the future and sustainability of this community. That is that we cannot sustain it unless we do sustain it. And that requires a conscious choice on our part. And it requires action on our part on occasion. It's like the old saying, the cost of freedom is vigilance. Well, it is. I made the point yesterday that people have some very diluted ideas of what constitutes a right. The truth is, a right is what you can hold. Otherwise, it's simply a privilege. Um, and so the question arises for us, can we hold the rights that we enjoy? Are we prepared to take the actions necessary to hold the rights that we enjoy? Um, or are we simply prepared to let them slip away if someone tries to take them? I'm watching every day what I would term Christian nationalist forces trying to restrict the rights of various minority communities. Do you think they're not going to eventually include us on their list? We're only not there now because they don't think that we're worth bothering with in the run-up. But don't think that will be the case forever. It would be foolish to think that. There is not room for us in a Christian nationalist society. And there really is no two ways around it. The very name of their movement says it. And we need to bear that in mind. And of course, this is not the only challenge we'll ever face. It's not the only challenge we ever have faced. Challenges will constantly come, as they do in everyday life. And so, going back to where we started, how do we see ourselves as a community? What do we want for our future? Do we want to be a group of legally recognized religions? Do we want to be able to practice in public? Do we really care? Some of our people have made clear they don't. Um, and I frankly don't have a lot of use for the people who don't care about those things, to be honest. Um, I think that we would be extraordinarily foolish to give up the rights that we have worked so hard to attain. And when we talk about things like expanding educational opportunities in our community, we're not going to do that without making sure of our legal status. When we talk about things like increased elder care, we're not going to be able to do that if we can't practice in public. Hello to Kazan in the chat room. It's good to see you, Kazan. Um, so I guess I'm really continuing what I was saying yesterday, which is that to put it in a more embracive context, I don't think anyone who belongs to any minority community can afford to be apolitical. And I certainly don't think that pagans and Wiccans, by and large, can. I think a lot of our community fools itself into thinking that we're way farther protected than we are. And I just have to point out to you that, again, look at the Satanic Panic. Not a long time ago at all, 30 years ago, I was a young man. Many of us should be able to remember that. Um, and if you had asked many of us a year before it happened, we would have said, well, that will never happen here. Or at least not at this time, and we were wrong. So we need to be mindful. I think that that we must be vigilant over our freedoms if we want to keep them. And if we want to build a stronger community in the future, if we want to build greater infrastructure, and we need to build greater infrastructure, that the first and most important bulwark toward doing that is to maintain our legal freedoms and not allow ourselves to be knocked down to second-class citizens in a legal sense. Patrick McCollum spent years fighting for pagan prison ministry. And one of the things that the prison organizers attempted to introduce in fighting against pagan prison ministers was the idea of a multi-tiered recognition of religion. That certain religions had a right to send to have chaplains in prisons and other institutions. Certain religions had a right to send their clergy into these institutions, and other ones did not. This wasn't even 20 years ago. It's quite recent. And these things can sneak up very quickly. And we need not to think that we're somehow immune to it. Now, of course, we are magical people. We do have spiritual resources that others might not. And yes, that's an argument one could make, and it's a real argument. But that's not an excuse for ignoring obvious dangers. And of all the things I've said and done during my career, this is certainly the least popular message that, again, I and Sir Edward have spent years trying to deliver to people. But I think it also is very, very important for the future. The other thing about it is that those who do defend their freedom, if they do so successfully, will be in a much better position than those who don't. And I'm not quite sure what else to say for that. But there are many ways to go about it, including things that I've talked about. There's political organization. There is There are, at least in some cases, ways in which the right social structures can provide a certain level of protection. Um, but to just ignore the situation is something we would be very foolish to do. Now, the things that our community needs, I've talked a little bit about things I think that we need. We need one of the things we really need, I think, is a lot more social interaction, a lot more social centers in our communities where we can come together regardless of what our traditional background is, what our specific kind of paganism or other metaphysical background is, um, without a lot of politics involved. And I think that more social nights, more low key types of events would be very beneficial to building these infrastructures that we need, because it could bring us together in ways where no one is fighting for the top slot. Unfortunately, we do have a bad tendency in our community to fight for the top slot. Um, the other thing that I tell people, because I was approached just last night by a potentially forming local pagan leadership coalition conference or what have you, um, asking for advice because I've been involved in several successful ones. And my advice on that subject is those who want to work together should. Those who don't should be left out of it. There is no need to involve people who don't wish to be involved. Sometimes people think that they must have everyone involved in order to be successful. And if you force someone to be involved who doesn't want to be, they're going to be very grumpy about it. Instead, work with the people who want to work together. And for everything that I'm saying today, I think that is an important part of the answer to to how we do these things. The people who want to work to preserve, promote, and build the community should work together. And for the people who aren't particularly concerned about it, well, they can go do whatever they want to do. Um, there is not a need to wait for them. There's also not a need for their permission, because there is no central authority here to give permission. Um, I found that there are some people who think they should have a vote on what um, other people do. It doesn't work that way. So if you want to organize something in your community, by all means, consider that. Of all the things that we need in the immediate future, low-key social events, I think, are probably the top. More educational outreach, more educational resources, and also the things to help the members of our community who are in need, because there are plenty of them. There always have been. There will be more in the future. And we do have resources in our community for those who are in need, but they tend to be few and far between. And hopefully we can build them up into a more significant contribution. So with that, I see we've come to the end of our half hour. Once again, tomorrow I will hopefully have a different subject, perhaps a little bit more cheerful, or maybe not. Maybe we'll keep talking about this for a while. And but I know it's not something people really like to talk about, and not something they really want to hear about. But not talking about it and not hearing about it doesn't make it go away. Um, the only thing that makes it go away, and even that doesn't make it go away, but it answers it, is to, again, be vigilant in our own rights. And to ignore that is very foolish. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening to me rant on a little bit about these subjects. And I very much enjoy this time with you. I love you all. I hope that all of you are having a lovely day. And let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we rejoice in this walk that we walk together. And we ask you to help us to be mindful of those things which might diminish us or hold us back, those things which might dampen our community and our personal expression, and help us to shine our light as brightly as we can and to move forward in the world in freedom and respect. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and with respect, and knowing you are always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always, and I will see you again tomorrow.